The fragile parchment trembled slightly between my fingers as the candle's flame flickered, casting long, wavering shadows against the cluttered walls of my workshop. Each word held the weight of 1,000 silenced voices, a testament to a life extinguished too soon, yet refusing to be forgotten. I traced the faded ink with trembling fingertips. The secret letter concealed within the forbidden clock, revealing the story of the man whose fate had become entwined with ours, whose final moments were a defiant echo against the oppressive silence that had fallen over Paris. It was late, the city outside wrapped in a suffocating stillness, as if time itself dared not breathe beneath the iron grip of the reign of terror. The absence of clocks was a constant, haunting reminder. To measure moments was to acknowledge a past the new order wished erased. Yet here I sat, treasuring this relic that ticked in the shadows, its hidden heart beating in secret defiance. The letter told of a man once ordinary, a craftsman like myself, whose hands had shaped beauty from metal and glass. But his true legacy was forged not in clocks or watches, but in his courage, the courage to stand against an unjust fate when the blade fell and the crowd's murmur rose to a roar. His words, penned in hurried script, spoke of hope, of resistance, of the power of memory to shape a future where liberty might yet bloom. I read and reread those words, each sentence a balm and a blade. The story was not just of a condemned soul, but a symbol, a beacon for those of us who dared to remember. The past, I realized, was not a weight to crush us, but a foundation upon which to build. Even as the guillotine's shadow stretched long and dark, the light of memory flickered stubbornly in the hearts of the oppressed. A soft knock drew me from my reverie. The door creaked open to reveal Lucille's familiar silhouette, her dark hair pulled back, eyes sharp and steady despite the wariness that clung to us all. She slipped inside, the faint scent of the streets clinging to her like a second skin. "You found it?" she whispered, her voice a thread of warmth in the cold gloom. I nodded, unfolding the letter once more, careful not to tear its fragile edges. His story, it's more than I imagined. He was like us, an ordinary man who chose to resist. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her resolve was clear. We carry his memory now. It's why we fight not just for ourselves, but for those who cannot. The silence between us was heavy yet charged, a shared understanding binding us tighter than any spoken vow. This letter was not merely a secret, it was a call to action, a testament to the unyielding spirit that could not be crushed even by the relentless march of time. Before I could respond, a sudden noise at the door alerted us. Jax stood there, his scarred face drawn tight with tension, eyes flickering with the unease that shadowed every step he took these days. "Dubois has increased patrols. He's sniffing closer," he said grimly. "We must be more careful." Lucille's hand moved instinctively to the small dagger at her waist, her stance tightening like a coiled spring. I felt the weight of his warning settle over us, a chilling reminder that our defiance was a fragile flame in a storm of steel and suspicion. Yet, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve, the letter remained a steady pulse beneath my skin, a heartbeat of hope in the dark. I looked once more at the faded script, at the words that bridged past and present, and understood that memory was our fiercest weapon. To forget would be to surrender, but to remember was to resist. Later, when the night deepened and Lucille and Jax had slipped away to their dangerous tasks, I stood by the window, gazing over the rooftops of a city cloaked in shadows. The distant sounds of footsteps and whispered secrets carried on the chill wind. Below, the silent streets seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. The forbidden clock ticked beneath the floorboards, a soft, steady rhythm that felt like a heartbeat against the cold void. It marked not just the passage of time, but the persistence of those who dared to defy its tyranny. In that moment, I understood the paradox that had haunted me since childhood. Time could never be truly owned or controlled, but memory could outlast even the sharpest blade. The weight of memory pressed upon me not as a burden, but as a mantle, The story of the condemned man was now ours to carry. His fate was a mirror reflecting our own struggles, fears, and hopes. And as the city slept uneasily under the guillotine's shadow, I vowed to guard his legacy with every breath. Tomorrow, the fight would continue, fiercer and more perilous than ever. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of my workshop, surrounded by the whispering ghosts of the past, I found a fragile peace. The past was alive within me, a flame that could not be snuffed out by fear or time. And so, as the candle guttered and the night deepened, I listened to the clock's forbidden tick, each pulse a promise that we would remember, resist, and rise again. But even as hope flickered, a shadow loomed on the horizon, and I knew that the coming days would test the limits of our courage. Would memory be enough to sustain us when the hour of reckoning struck, or would the relentless march of time crush us all beneath its unforgiving heel? The answer lay just beyond the horizon, in the dark heart of a city waiting to awaken, and I, Tyne Moreau, would be there to meet it. The rain fell in relentless sheets over Paris that evening, turning the cobblestone streets into rivers of slick, glistening stone. I pressed my back against the cold brick of my workshop, heart pounding against my ribs like a frantic clockwork mechanism. The city around me was suffocating beneath the shadow of the reign of terror, and the silence was broken only by the distant, cruel clang of the guillotine's blade, a grim metronome measuring out the lives snuffed out in the name of the Republic. I dared not move, my breath shallow, as the heavy boots of revolutionary guards echoed near. Commissaire Dubois was drawing closer still, his presence a dark tide slowly engulfing the fragile sanctuary of my secret. I could feel his gaze, cold and unyielding, like the steel of the very blades he so faithfully served. He was a man forged in the fires of conviction, and yet, beneath that austere exterior, I sensed a flicker of something else, doubt, perhaps, or the faintest whisper of regret. Earlier that day, whispers in the underground had reached my ears. Dubois was more relentless than ever, his squads scouring every corner where hope dared to hide. Lucille had come by, her dark eyes sharp and resolute beneath the humble guise of a seamstress. She brought news, her voice low and urgent as we exchanged messages cloaked in coded words. Jacques, ever the cynic, lingered in the shadows, his scarred face taut with tension. His allegiance was a fragile thread, stretched thin between survival and the thirst for vengeance. I returned to my workbench, fingers trembling as I adjusted the delicate gears of the forbidden clock. Its ticking was a lifeline, a defiant heartbeat against the silent tyranny that sought to erase time itself. Each tick was a whisper of rebellion, a promise that fate was not yet sealed. Meanwhile, Dubois sat alone in his quarters, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across the cracked mirror before him. His reflection was a harsh reminder of the man he had become, a guardian of order at a terrible cost. His jaw clenched as memories surfaced unbidden, faces of the innocent lost, the weight of sacrifices made in the name of a fragile peace. Yet his resolve remained ironclad. The Republic's survival demanded sacrifice, no matter how bitter. As night deepened, the city seemed to hold its breath. I heard the distant murmurs of voices, the hurried steps of those who dared to defy the regime. Lucille and Jacques met in a quiet tavern, their whispered plans weaving threads of hope amid the ever-tightening web of danger. Their courage was a fragile flame, flickering but unextinguished. The tension coiled tighter within me. Each moment was a fragile balance between defiance and despair. The clock ticked on, a silent sentinel counting down not just minutes, but the fragile chances left to us all. Dubois's pursuit was no mere hunt. It was a battle of wills, a clash between the unyielding force of time and the stubborn human spirit that dared to challenge it. And beneath his stern gaze, I sensed the cracks of a man wrestling with the cost of his own righteousness. Tonight, beneath the relentless gaze of Commissaire Dubois, the fate of us all hung in the balance, measured not by the passing of hours, but by the courage to defy the shadow of time itself. The night held its secrets close, But the dawn would come, and with it, the reckoning. The air in my workshop was thick with the scent of oil and metal, the faint ticking of the forbidden clock steady yet somehow louder than usual. It was as if the very heartbeat of our resistance pulsed in that delicate mechanism hidden away from prying eyes, a secret sanctuary amid the storm of the reign of terror. Tonight, the shadows seemed to press closer, their darkness heavier than ever before. A letter had arrived, carried by Lucille's swift hands, and its contents gnawed at my resolve like a relentless rat. The message was brief but devastating. One among us had betrayed our cause. The words burned through me, scorching the fragile trust we had painstakingly built. Betrayal was a poison far worse than the guillotine's blade. It threatened not only our lives, but the very spark of hope that the forbidden clock represented. I stood motionless, fingers brushing the worn brass casing of the clock, its ticking a cruel reminder of the time slipping away. I knew the risk of suspicion that had always lurked in the corners of our gatherings. Fear twisted the hearts of men and women, turning friends into shadows of doubt. But now the betrayal was no longer a whisper, it was a cold, hard truth that demanded action. I could not afford the luxury of paralysis. The resistance depended on my decision. The clock's secret was too precious to be lost to recklessness. I summoned Jax to meet me in the courtyard behind the workshop. The night wrapped around us like a shroud as I waited, heart hammering against my ribs with a mixture of dread and determination. When he arrived, his rugged face was etched with a wariness that spoke of battles fought both within and without. The scars that marred his skin told stories of survival, but his eyes, those guarded, watchful eyes, held deeper secrets. "Jax," I began, my voice low but steady. "There are whispers, darker than before. I need to know, are you one of them?" He met my gaze without flinching, the flicker of lantern light casting long shadows that danced across his face. "You think I would betray you? After all we've been through." "I cannot afford doubt," I replied. "Not now. The clock's time is running out, and every second stolen by betrayal tightens the noose around us." His silence was a heavy weight, broken only by the distant clatter of boots, revolutionary guards prowling the streets, relentless in their hunt for dissent. The tension between us was a fragile thread stretched taut, threatening to snap. Elsewhere, Lucille moved like a shadow herself, weaving through the labyrinthine alleys with purposeful speed. Her breath fogged the cold night air as she delivered urgent warnings, her dark eyes blazing with fierce loyalty. She carried not only messages, but the collective hope of those who dared to dream of freedom. Her courage was a beacon, cutting through the despair that threatened to engulf us all. Back in the dim light of the workshop, I sat alone beside the hidden clock. Its ticking echoed in the silence like a metronome, marking the rhythm of my thoughts, each beat a reminder of the impossible choices before me. To expose the traitor was to risk fracturing our fragile alliance. To remain silent was to court destruction. The cost of resistance was no longer abstract. It was a knife pressed against the throat of our cause. I traced the delicate hands of the clock, feeling their cold, unyielding presence. Could I protect the greater good without sacrificing the humanity that bound us? This question haunted me, a specter at the crossroads of fear and hope. The night deepened, and with it, the weight of my decision. The city outside held its breath, caught between the tyranny of the present and the promise of a future yet unwritten. In the heart of that darkness, I resolved to act not as a survivor clinging to shadows, but as a man willing to face the dawn, however uncertain its light might be. The forbidden clock would keep ticking, so would I, and when the time came to unveil its secret, we would be ready. The shadows in my workshop seemed to deepen, pressing in like the very night itself had taken refuge within these walls. I sat at the worn wooden bench, fingers trembling as they hovered over the delicate hands of the forbidden clock. This clock, my secret heartbeat amid the silence of repression, ticked softly but defiantly, a metronome counting down not just minutes or hours, but the fragile hope for freedom. The metallic click of each tick resonated in the stillness, a whispered rebellion against the tyrannical silence that had fallen over Paris. I leaned closer, eyes narrowing as I adjusted the minute hand. The countdown was in its final hours. Every second was a stolen breath, a stolen moment of courage, a defiance of the inexorable decree imposed by Commissaire Dubois and his merciless guards. The city outside seemed to hold its breath too, caught in the suffocating grip of fear. Yet within me, a spark glowed brighter than ever. This was the moment to act. A sudden, soft knock at the door startled me. The familiar figure of Lucille slipped through the shadowed threshold, her dark hair barely visible under a worn hood. Her eyes, fierce and unwavering, met mine in silence. We had little time. The plan we had woven through whispered meetings and coded messages was about to unfold. "They are tightening their patrols," Lucille murmured, her voice low, eyes darting toward the street beyond the window. "Dubois is hunting for any sign of the clock. We must move swiftly." I nodded, swallowing the knot of fear that threatened to choke me. The people need to see it, to know the time has not been erased. Her hand brushed mine briefly, a silent promise in the cold air. Later that evening, we met in the narrow alleyways where the city's pulse was faint but persistent. The smell of damp stone and burning tallow mingled as Lucille and I exchanged hurried instructions beneath the flickering glow of a lone lantern. Our voices were hushed, yet each word carried the weight of desperate hope. Jax appeared from the shadows, his scarred face etched with tension. "Dubois patrols will sweep the eastern quarters twice before midnight," he reported, voice clipped. "We have a narrow window." His presence was a double-edged sword, an ally whose loyalty was as uncertain as the future itself. As the forbidden hour approached, we made our way to the central square, the very heart of the city's oppression. The streets were eerily silent, save for the distant murmur of guards and the soft hum of restless whispers from hidden watchers. I carried the clock, its face faintly illuminated by a concealed candle. The ticking, once muffled by walls and shadows, now dared to challenge the silence of the terror-stricken night. "Remember," I whispered to Lucille, "this is more than a clock. It is a voice, a symbol. We defy the erasure of time, the erasure of memory." We placed the clock atop the fountain's edge, its ticking drawing curious glances from those who dared peek from behind shuttered windows. A murmur grew, a ripple of recognition, of hope. Suddenly a shout pierced the night. "Seize them!" The sharp voice of a guard cut through the air. Commissaire Dubois himself emerged, his cold gaze fixed upon us like the blade of the guillotine. The forbidden hour had arrived. Fear surged, but so did resolve. The people stirred, emboldened by the defiant ticking that refused to be silenced. In that moment, I understood the paradox of time. It was both our oppressor and our greatest weapon. The battle for memory and freedom had begun anew, and though the outcome was uncertain, the spark was lit. The clock's hands moved inexorably forward, but in this hour we chose to fight against the shadow it cast. As guards closed in, Lucille grasped my arm. "No matter what happens," she said, "this hour will be remembered." And in the depths of my soul, I believed her. The forbidden hour was upon us, and with it, the fragile light of hope flickered fiercely in the darkness. The air in the workshop was thick with tension, suffused by the faint, relentless ticking of the forbidden clock, a sound that Tyne had come to equate with the fragile pulse of hope itself. But now that pulse seemed to falter, as if the very heartbeat of their rebellion was under siege. Jacques' words hung heavily between them, whispered in the shadows but sharp as a blade. "Tian," he had said, his voice rough and uncertain, "I have betrayed you. The guards are coming, they know about the clock." For a moment, Tyne felt the room spin, the walls closing in with the weight of disbelief. Jacques, the man whose cynicism often clashed with his quiet hope, had crossed a line no one dared approach. The betrayal was a wound deeper than any blade, slicing through the fabric of trust they had painstakingly woven. "Why?" Tyne's voice was barely audible, a brittle thread in the silence. Jacques looked away, the scars on his face seeming to deepen with shame. I did what I thought was necessary to survive. The regime's grip tightens. I feared for my life, for all of us. The words stung, but beneath the pain simmered a grudging understanding. Survival was a cruel currency in these times, often exacted at the expense of loyalty and love. Tian paced the length of his workshop, the worn floorboards creaking beneath his steps. Each tick of the clock seemed to echo louder, a defiant call amidst encroaching darkness. He glanced at the hidden compartment housing the clock, now a fragile secret threatened by exposure. The betrayal had not only endangered the clock, but threatened the very soul of their resistance. The underground network they had nurtured with care was fracturing, suspicion poisoning their once unshackable bonds. Lucille arrived shortly after, her footsteps muffled by the night but her presence as vivid as a flame. Her face was pale, eyes shining with unshed tears and unwavering determination. "Tyne," she whispered fiercely, "we cannot let this break us. The clock is more than a mechanism, it is our symbol, our defiance. We must stand firm." Her words stirred something within him. A flicker of the courage he feared was extinguished. The fragile bond between them, forged in whispered hopes and shared dangers, anchored him. But the threat loomed large. Commissaire Dubois, the embodiment of the regime's unforgiving will, was already mobilizing. From his vantage point high above the city, his cold gaze swept the labyrinthine streets, locking onto Tyne's workshop as the epicenter of rebellion. Dubois's mind was a machine of ruthless calculation. He believed in order, in the absolute necessity of erasing the past to build the future. Yet, beneath his stern exterior, doubt gnawed at him. Was the cost of this control worth the human suffering? The question haunted him in the silent watches of the night. Back in the workshop, Tian sat alone, the clock's ticking now a hollow echo as its mechanism lay still. He cradled the silent timepiece, the weight of betrayal and loss pressing down like the Parisian fog that crept through the narrow streets. Yet, within the depths of grief, a new fire kindled. The betrayal, though bitter, had laid bare the stakes. The fight was no longer just about survival, but about reclaiming their stolen time and memories. Tyne's resolve hardened. He would not allow Jax's treachery to extinguish the fragile light they had kindled. For Lucille, for Henry, for the city gasping under the guillotine's shadow, he would rise again. The betrayal unveiled more than danger. It revealed the true cost of defiance and the unyielding spirit needed to confront it. As the first light of dawn touched the rooftops, Tian prepared to face the storm not as a broken man, but as a beacon of resistance in the encroaching night. The time for silence had ended. The clock's defiant heartbeat, though muted for now, would soon ring out once more, heralding a reckoning that could not be silenced. The night was thick with tension, the kind that settles deep in the bones, heavy and unyielding. In the dim confines of my workshop, the flicker of a lone candle cast long shadows across the walls, dancing over scattered papers, maps, and the forbidden clock resting silently between my trembling hands. Lucille sat opposite me, her dark eyes sharp with resolve, scanning the coded messages that had arrived just hours before. The ticking of the clock, so defiant in its persistence, filled the room like a heartbeat steady, unrelenting, a whisper against the silence the regime demanded. "It's almost time," I murmured, voice barely audible. "If we wait any longer, the man's fate will be sealed forever." Lucille nodded, her fingers tightening around a folded note. "The network is ready. Jax has gathered the men. Tonight, we strike." The plan was perilous. To reveal the forbidden clock publicly was to paint a target on our backs, to invite the full wrath of Commissaire Dubois and his guards. Yet the alternative, silence, submission, the slow death of hope, was a sentence far worse. The clock was more than a mechanism. It was a symbol, a beacon of defiance against the relentless oppression that sought to erase not only time but memory itself. Outside, the streets of Paris lay shrouded in fog, the gas lamps casting halos of dim light that barely penetrated the darkness. I wrapped my worn cloak tighter, the fabric thin but familiar. Lucille's hand found mine, a brief anchor before we slipped into the night. Jax awaited us near the old mill, his scarred face set in a grim mask. "The men are ready," he said, voice low. "Commissaire Dubois has doubled patrols, but there's a gap just before dawn. That's when we move." The small band of rebels, faces marked by fear and fierce determination, gathered silently. Each carried the weight of personal loss, memories of loved ones taken by the guillotine's blade, fueling the fire burning within them. Among them, Henry's youthful eyes shone with a mixture of hope and terror, the next generation standing on the brink of change. We moved like shadows through the labyrinth of alleys, the city's pulse quickening with the approach of dawn. Our destination was the public square, where the condemned man was to meet his fate. The crowd was already gathering, a sea of faces etched with dread and resignation, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant clang of the guillotine. Hidden beneath my cloak, the forbidden clock ticked steadily, its presence both a comfort and a challenge. To many, time was a tool of tyranny, an instrument to measure out life until the inevitable end. But to us, it was a weapon, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, the spark of rebellion could not be silenced. As the executioner's hooded figure emerged, a murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught Lucille's eye, her lips pressed into a determined line. This was the moment, the spark we had dared to ignite. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the air. From the shadows, Jax and the rebels surged forward, their shouts slicing through the silence like blades. The guards scrambled, muskets raised, but the element of surprise was ours. Chaos erupted, a clash of wills and weapons, the square alive with the fury of desperate men and women fighting for a sliver of freedom. I moved swiftly, heart pounding, as I made my way to the scaffold. The condemned man, gaunt and pale, turned his eyes to me, a silent plea, a shared understanding. With trembling hands, I revealed the forbidden clock, its ticking a bold declaration against the regime's cruelty. "Time has not forgotten you," I whispered, voice steady despite the storm around us, "and neither have we." The guards closed in, muskets firing, but the crowd's momentum surged like a tide. For a fleeting moment, the city held its breath, suspended between past horrors and the fragile promise of dawn. The battle was fierce, and the cost was heavy. Friends fell, and hope threatened to flicker out amid the smoke and blood. Yet, in that crucible of fear and defiance, a new fire was kindled, one that no guillotine, no regime could fully extinguish. As the first rays of morning pierced the gloom, I realized that the spark we had ignited was more than a fleeting act of rebellion. It was the beginning of a story that would outlast us all, a testament to the unyielding spirit of those who dare to defy the shadow of time. But as the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, a question lingered in my mind, heavy as the silence that followed. Could this fragile flame truly grow into a revolution, or would the relentless march of tyranny snuff it out before it had a chance to burn? The answer, I knew, lay not in the clock's ticking, but in the hearts of those willing to fight for the freedom it promised. And so, with the dawn breaking over a city forever changed, I stepped forward into the unknown, the forbidden clock silent now, but alive within me, a defiant heartbeat against the darkness.